What the Void Collective never considered, what their entire strategic doctrine told them was functionally impossible, was that humans had been quietly studying their technology for months. Not just observing, not just scanning from a distance, but actively reverse engineering systems the galaxy considered unbreakable. The Void's encryption, their propulsion models, even their matter conversion principles, all of it was built on the assumption that lesser species couldn't comprehend the underlying physics. They treated their tech like a locked box only they had the key to. Earth's engineers picked the lock, copied the key, and then made a better one. The setup was almost elegant in its simplicity. A few scattered encounters with void probes, a handful of salvaged components from skirmishes they weren't even part of, some intercepted data streams. That was all it took. Human engineering teams working in unmarked facilities buried under mountains or scattered across ocean floors took those fragments and rebuilt the whole puzzle. They didn't just replicate, they iterated. They saw the Void's matter conversion systems not as finished products but as starting points. The tension came from the sheer speed of it. The technological gap that should have taken centuries to close vanished in months. It wasn't a gradual catch-up. It was a leap. Where the Void used matter conversion for efficient resource harvesting, human teams asked a different question. What happens if we push this same principle toward pure velocity? Toward directed force? They reconfigured the underlying mechanics, ran simulations that violated Void safety protocols, and built prototypes that operated beyond original design limits. The innovation wasn't in inventing new science. It was in applying existing science without restraint. They turned the Void's own tools against them, not through theft but through creative reinterpretation. The galaxy's assumption was that primitive species imitate, humans improve. Earth's outward appearance, the seemingly outdated satellites, the conventional defense grids, the lack of visible advanced infrastructure, concealed a network of laboratories operating at superpower levels. The Void sensors scanned for fleet sizes and energy signatures consistent with their own development models. They didn't scan for innovation happening in converted cargo holds or deep undergreen research hubs. They saw what they expected to see, a species lagging behind. The reality was a civilization running a parallel tech tree, hidden in plain sight. The resolution became painfully clear the moment the first human-modified ships powered up. The Harvester wasn't facing a backward species trying to play with advanced tech. It was facing its own technology, refined, optimized, and applied with a level of reckless creativity the Void's risk-averse culture would never permit. Their own science turned against them, but faster, leaner, and more aggressive. And just as that realization began to dawn on the Harvester's command crew, 400 human ships dropped stealth and accelerated toward them, not with the hesitant, cautious approach of a new player, with the confident, unified motion of someone who'd already mastered the rules and chosen to break them. The Void Harvester's command deck was probably still debating whether the unusual energy readings were sensor ghosts or some kind of human deception tactic when 400 ships just appeared. No slow decloaking, no dramatic reveal. One moment, empty space. The next, a coordinated wave of human-designed vessels accelerating toward them with a unity the Void Collective hadn't seen outside its own elite formations. It was the kind of tactical precision that takes generations to develop, not months. The kind of thing their developmental models said was flat-out impossible for a species at Earth's supposed level. The lead ship, designated UES Surprise in a typically understated bit of human humor, opened a channel. No video, just audio. The captain's voice was calm, almost conversational. He explained, in the kind of tone you'd use to describe a home renovation project, that Earth's engineers had been busy. They hadn't just studied Void technology. They had taken it apart, understood its principles, and then rebuilt it. Better. They didn't copy. They iterated. The power cores humming inside those 400 ships weren't crude imitations. They were refined versions of the Void's own designs, stripped of safety limiters and efficiency compromises, pushed to their absolute theoretical maxima. The technological superiority the Void had relied on for centuries evaporated in that single, silent moment. Their sensors, recalibrating frantically, reported the truth they couldn't accept. The human vessels weren't just comparable to their harvesting systems. In some metrics, they were superior. Faster acceleration curves, tighter maneuverability signatures, energy outputs that spiked into ranges the Void reserved for their largest capital ships. This wasn't a fleet built through gradual development. It was a fleet assembled through pure, unadulterated ingenuity, a creative solution to an existential problem. Every ship represented a physics problem that had been solved not with patience but with boldness. You could see the realization hit the Void command staff. The panic wasn't about being outnumbered. It was about being outthought. Their entire strategic doctrine was based on a predictable technological hierarchy. A species either had the tech or it didn't. There was no category for a civilization that could reverse engineer, improve, and mass-produce advanced technology in a fraction of the time it should have taken. The exultant wave of human capability approaching them wasn't just a military formation. It was a statement, a physical rebuttal to centuries of galactic assumptions about progress and power. Earth's grand bluff was over. The pretense of primitiveness, the casual disinterest, the bureaucratic sluggishness, it was all revealed as the galaxy's most dangerous piece of misdirection. They hadn't been hiding their capabilities. They'd been hiding their progress. While the galaxy looked at their outdated surface infrastructure, they were building a next-generation fleet in the dark. And as that fleet closed the distance, a new transmission cut through the chaos. Admiral Cross's voice, cool and utterly certain, delivered a 19-word ultimatum that would send the entire Void command structure into a spiral of pure, unadulterated panic. The game was over. The lesson was about to begin. Admiral Cross's transmission to the Void Collective contained 19 words that changed galactic history. It wasn't a dramatic broadcast, no grand speech or theatrical posturing. Just a clean, clear signal sent on a secure channel the Void had thought was theirs alone. The message opened with a simple statement. You have 90 seconds to begin emergency withdrawal from Sol space. No threat, no bargaining, no room for interpretation. It was a countdown, plain and absolute. The tension didn't come from the first part. It came from the second. After that, you're going to learn why humans have a reputation for being unreasonably destructive when someone threatens our home. That was it. No further explanation. No list of demands. No conditions. Just a statement of fact, delivered with the cold certainty of someone reading a weather report for a hurricane that's already forming offshore. The ultimatum wasn't a negotiation. It wasn't an opening position. It was a prediction, a declaration of inevitable consequences. On the Void command deck, the response was immediate and visceral. Panic, but not the chaotic kind. The cold, systemic kind that happens when a highly organized structure realizes its foundational assumptions are wrong. Their sensors, finally recalibrating under stress, confirmed what their instincts were already screaming. The human ships weren't just numerous, they were powerful. Their energy signatures matched and in some cases exceeded the Harvester's own systems. The technological edge they had relied on for centuries was gone, erased. They weren't facing an upstart species. They were facing a peer, one that had appeared out of nowhere, armed with their own science, refined and weaponized. Every second of that countdown ticked by with the weight of a tectonic shift. This wasn't just about one ship in one system. It was about the entire galactic power structure. For the first time, a major power was being given an order, not a request, and the entity giving the order was a species they had cataloged as primitive, dismissible, irrelevant. The panic wasn't just about tactical disadvantage. It was about strategic miscalculation on a historic scale. They had completely misread Earth's capabilities, but more importantly, they had completely misread their resolve. Humanity's calm wasn't ignorance. It was patience. Their refusal to engage wasn't weakness. It was preparation. The resolution was stark. The Void Collective faced a binary choice, the kind they were used to imposing on others. Retreat immediately, acknowledging a seismic shift in the balance of power, or stay and receive a first-hand demonstration of why humanity's casual saying about stupid games and stupid prizes was not a metaphor. It was a promise. And for the first time in their long expansionist history, a galactic superpower felt genuine, unadulterated terror, not of a rival empire but of humans. The 90 seconds weren't just a deadline. They were the last moments of the old galactic order, a countdown to a new reality. What happened in those 90 seconds redefined the meaning of diplomatic incident across the galaxy. You have to understand, the Void Collective hesitated, not out of defiance but sheer processing failure. Their command structure, built for orderly decision-making under predictable conditions, simply couldn't compute Earth's sudden technological leap. Their harvesting systems, designed to efficiently dismantle primitive worlds, weren't built for a peer-level fight. They were tools of extraction, not combat, and they were now facing a force that matched them not in size but in raw applied power. Human ships didn't attack, not at first. They demonstrated. They moved with velocities the Void's tactical models hadn't even considered feasible for vessels of that size. They performed maneuvers that should have torn their own frames apart, showing a disregard for inertial safety limits that bordered on the pathological. They lit up targeting systems that locked onto the Harvester's core systems with an accuracy that was, frankly, insulting. The Manhattan-sized vessel, an object of terror just hours before, suddenly looked exactly like what it was. A big, slow, vulnerable target. Its size was no longer an advantage. It was a liability. Earth's greatest advantage wasn't their new technology. It was their complete willingness to violate centuries of established interstellar combat norms. There was no formal declaration, no choreographed dance of escalating threats, no honor code. The human fleet's movements were clean, efficient, and utterly without ceremony. They weren't fighting a battle. They were solving a problem. The Void's orderly retreat, what should have been a dignified withdrawal, dissolved into a panicked scramble. Thrusters fired at emergency capacity. Navigation systems rerouted frantically. The Harvester, a symbol of unstoppable expansion, was now running. The hunters had become the hunted. Earth delivered the stupid prize for the stupid game with chilling precision. They didn't destroy the Harvester. They didn't need to. They crippled its primary systems, disabled its engines, and left it drifting. A powerless, silent monument to miscalculation. It was a more effective message than any victory broadcast. A demonstration of restraint that was, in its own way, more terrifying than outright destruction. It proved they could have taken the ship apart if they wanted to. They chose not to. This time. But the real revelation wasn't the ship's helplessness. It was the data stream that flooded from its compromised servers in those final, chaotic moments. Panic does interesting things to communication protocols. Security measures fail, redundancies collapse, and in that brief window, as the Void crew fought to regain control, a torrent of classified information spilled out. It wasn't just operational data or technical schematics. It was correspondence, contracts. The Harvester hadn't been on a solo mission. It was hired muscle. This wasn't just a territorial dispute. It was a conspiracy, and Earth's intelligence teams were suddenly listening in. After the Harvester stood disabled and silent, Earth's intelligence teams got to work. They didn't use harsh methods. They just sifted through the flood of data the panicked Void crew had let slip in their final moments of systemic collapse. And in that data, they found the real story. The Void Collective hadn't acted on their own initiative. They were contractors. Hired muscle. The kind of outfit you call when you want a problem to disappear but don't want your name on the paperwork. The contract was buried under layers of encrypted intermediaries and false front corporations, the kind of bureaucratic maze that usually keeps secrets safe. But panic makes organizations messy. They found the terms. The objective wasn't resource acquisition or territorial expansion. It was listed as resolution of the human problem. A neat, clean phrase that meant elimination. Not conquest. Erasure. The job was to force Earth into the Grand Alliance as a compliant vassal or, failing that, remove it as a variable entirely. A tidy solution to a diplomatic complication. The real shock wasn't the contract itself. It was who signed it. The money, the directives, the strategic goals, all of it traced back to the Zephyrian Empire. Not directly, of course. They were too careful for that. They used cutouts, third-party negotiators, a whole chain of plausible deniability. But the signature was there, hidden in the financial routing codes and command protocols. The Zephyrians saw Earth's stubborn independence not as a curiosity, but as a threat. Their entire power structure is built on a delicate balance of controlled vassals and managed rivals. A species that simply says no, that doesn't ask for permission, that's disruptive, unpredictable, dangerous to the established order. They didn't want a war. They wanted a solution. So they hired the Void Collective to provide one, a neat professional piece of geopolitical tidying. Send in the cleaners, remove the mess, and bill it to an off-world operations fund. Standard procedure for an empire that's been playing the same game for 1,000 years. They assumed the Void's technological edge would make it quick, efficient, a surgical strike. They never considered that Earth might not just be a problem to be solved, but a player capable of solving them right back. The resolution changed everything. This wasn't a simple border incident or a case of misunderstood first contact. It was a conspiracy, a calculated move by one of the galaxy's oldest powers to eliminate a potential rival through proxy force. Earth's military victory was suddenly just the opening act. The real conflict was diplomatic, political. The Harvester wasn't the enemy. It was evidence. And Earth now had all the data it needed to shift the confrontation from the battlefield to the negotiating table. The next move wouldn't involve ships or weapons. It would involve a formal letter, a stack of evidence, and a completely new set of rules for how the galaxy would operate from now on. The reckoning was just beginning. Earth's leadership faced a clear choice after the Zephyrian conspiracy came to light. They could accept integration into the existing galactic order on terms set by others, essentially becoming a managed vassal with limited autonomy, or they could tear up the entire playbook and propose something entirely new. They went with option 2. The revelation that one of the galaxy's oldest powers had tried to eliminate them through proxy force wasn't just a threat, it was an opportunity. A chance to reframe the very foundations of interstellar relations. Here's the thing about traditional galactic politics. It runs on coercion. The strong dominate the weak. Power is hierarchical, maintained through complex systems of obligation, threat, and conditional protection. It's a model that's been in place for centuries. Everyone plays by those rules because nobody has had both the capability and the willingness to challenge them. Earth had both. So they didn't issue a declaration of war or a list of grievances. They issued an invitation. They called it the Soul Accords. The framework was simple, which is what made it so radical. It was built on 3 principles: consent, cooperation, and mutual benefit. No forced alliances, no hierarchical integration, no vassal states. Species would work together because they wanted to, not because they were compelled. Resources would be shared, not extracted. Defense would be collective but voluntary. It was a complete rejection of the established model, a diplomatic revolution wrapped in polite language. The official letter Earth sent to the galactic powers was a masterpiece of tone. It coupled defiance with openness. It didn't threaten retaliation for the Zephyrian plot. It presented the evidence calmly, then pivoted to a proposal. It acknowledged the attempt to force Earth's compliance, then invited everyone, including the Zephyrians, to something better. The subtext was clear. We know what you tried to do. We could respond in kind. Instead, we're offering you a way out. A chance to build something that doesn't rely on fear and domination. The resolution shifted the entire conflict. Earth wasn't just defending itself anymore. It was launching a diplomatic offensive. It was offering the galaxy a new operating system. One where smaller species, isolationist cultures, and non-aligned worlds could engage without sacrificing their sovereignty. The old powers initially dismissed it as naive idealism, a hopeless fantasy from a species that didn't understand how the universe really works. But the offer was on the table. And for species tired of being pawns in someone else's game, it was suddenly very attractive. Isolationist civilizations that had spent centuries avoiding galactic politics began paying attention. They saw in the Soul Accords a framework that respected their choice to be left alone while still offering access to shared technology and mutual defense. It was the opposite of the Grand Alliance's absorption model. It was an à la carte system of interstellar relations, and Earth, by demonstrating it could defend itself and rewrite the rules, made the offer credible. The galaxy's dinner party was about to get a lot more crowded, and the host had just changed the menu. Within days, the Soul Accords began reshaping galactic power in ways nobody predicted. Least of all the established empires who thought they'd seen every possible permutation of interstellar politics. You don't often get a complete rewrite of the rulebook delivered by a species that's only been on the galactic stage for a few months, but here we were. Earth didn't waste time. They opened formal diplomatic channels with a dozen minor species within the first 48 hours, signing mutual defense pacts that were startlingly straightforward. No hidden clauses, no vassal obligations, just clear terms of cooperation. It was like watching someone replace a complicated legal contract with a handshake. A very firm, very serious handshake. The Old Republic Alliance and Crystalline Hegemony initially treated the whole thing with polite skepticism. They saw it as a naive experiment, a temporary disruption soon to be corrected by realpolitik. Their ambassadors made cautious statements about respecting new models while quietly expecting the framework to collapse under its own idealism. That changed when Earth started sharing, not just information, technology, specifically, refinements, in quantum processing and weapon systems derived from reverse-engineered Void and Zephyrian tech. The kind of advances that should have taken decades to distribute, handed over in exchange for cooperation. It's hard to argue with free upgrades, especially when they make your own fleets faster and your defensive grids smarter. Self-interest is a powerful motivator, even for traditionalists. The Void Collective, stripped of their harvester superiority and facing the reality that their business model was now obsolete, adapted with a pragmatism that was almost admirable. They pivoted from expansion to cooperation. Their massive ships, once used for planetary stripping, were repurposed for disaster relief and large-scale environmental restoration. It turned out the same tech that could tear a world apart could also put one back together, if you pointed it in the right direction. They found a new market, a more stable one, ironically. Then the isolationists joined, the Andromedans, a species that had famously walled off their sector for 3 centuries, sent a delegation. They'd been watching, and they saw in the Soul Accord something they'd never been offered before, a way to engage without being absorbed, a chance to share knowledge and security without sacrificing sovereignty. Their membership was quiet, but it sent a shock through the diplomatic circuits. If the Andromedans were willing to come out of isolation, the model had real weight. The physical symbol of all this became Harmony Station, a joint construction project in neutral space, built by a dozen species working together. No single empire controlled it. Labor and resources were contributed voluntarily, a shared project for a shared future. It wasn't just a space station. It was a statement, a working example of the Accords in practice. The galaxy's new diplomatic nerve center, built not by decree, but by collective agreement. The resolution was clear. Earth's early statement, "We now have the strength to ensure our independence," was no longer a defensive justification. It was the foundation of a new galactic order, one where strength wasn't used to dominate, but to enable cooperation, where independence wasn't a threat, but a prerequisite for genuine collaboration. And quietly, almost as an aside, the term Earth's Tuesday started popping up in diplomatic cables and military briefings, a shorthand for the kind of day where a species casually rewrites the rules of civilization before lunch. It was about to become a very common phrase. Admiral Cross's leadership style, a mix of no-nonsense pragmatism and what I can only describe as aggressive optimism, turned Earth into something the galaxy never expected, its unofficial mediator. The kind of reality check you call when your own diplomatic playbooks have failed and you need someone who doesn't care about centuries of precedent. It wasn't a title they asked for. It was a role they earned by being the only ones who could actually get things done without getting bogged down in ceremony. Harmony Station became the physical proof of this new approach. Still under construction, it was already functioning as more than just a diplomatic hub. It was a workshop, a testing ground. Species that had been rivals for generations were suddenly working side by, not because they were forced to, but because they were curious. They were sharing tech, comparing notes, solving practical problems like radiation shielding and gravity regulation. It was collaboration stripped of politics, just engineers and architects getting things built. The station wasn't designed by committee. It was assembled by consensus, and it worked better because of it. The old galactic powers struggled with this. Their entire systems were built on rigid hierarchies, clear chains of command, and well-defined roles. Earth's model was fluid, inclusive, messy. The Zephyrian leadership in particular found it disorienting. They'd spent centuries understanding power as a fixed alphabet. Each species had its place, from A to Z. Suddenly, Earth introduced a new character, one that could fit anywhere, rewrite words, even change the meaning of sentences. They realized too late that the alphabet was being redesigned around humanity. Not because Earth demanded it, but because others preferred it. What made Earth uniquely valuable was their dual capability. They could defend themselves with a ferocity that made admirals nervous, but they could also facilitate cooperation with a light touch that made diplomats relax. They became the go-to source for both advanced weapons and conflict resolution. A strange combination, but it made sense. If you're buying defensive systems from someone, you tend to listen when they suggest talking instead of shooting. Their credibility was built on demonstrated power, but their influence grew through demonstrated fairness. Despite being the newest species on the block, Earth found itself in the center of every major negotiation, every territorial dispute, every technological exchange. Older civilizations would present problems, and Earth would offer solutions that were straightforward, often innovative, and always voluntary. No coercion, no hidden terms, just clear options. It was refreshing and it was effective. The universe became, for lack of a better word, more fun with humans involved. More unpredictable, certainly. Less orderly. But also more interesting. Disputes that would have dragged on for years under the old system were resolved in weeks. Stagnant research projects got new life from human curiosity. The galactic community, which had been stuck in a centuries-long rut of cautious, risk-averse politics, was suddenly experimenting, adapting, trying new things. And that unpredictability, that willingness to ignore tradition and just try what works, was exactly what the system needed. It wasn't chaos. It was creativity. A necessary shakeup for a civilization that had forgotten how to think outside its own rulebook. Earth didn't set out to become the galaxy's mediator. They just started fixing problems nobody else could, and everyone kept calling. You know, Earth's Tuesday became this great piece of galactic shorthand for the kind of day where a species casually upends centuries of tradition before lunch. It wasn't just a phrase, it was a cultural artifact. A way to describe the particular blend of calm competence and disruptive innovation that humanity brought to the cosmos. The Soul Accords, once dismissed as an idealistic experiment, became the new diplomatic baseline. Every new species that made first contact got a copy, often with a few amendments suggested by the newcomers themselves. It was a living document, not a fixed treaty. It evolved. The traditional powers had to make their peace with it. They didn't have a choice. Earth was the galaxy's go-to mediator and its most surprising source of innovation. You needed a territorial dispute settled? Call Earth. You needed a stubborn engineering problem solved? Believe it or not, also call Earth. Their teams had a knack for cutting through complexity and finding a solution that was both effective and simple. It was infuriating for bureaucrats and glorious for everyone else. The Zephyrian Empire, in particular, had to swallow a pretty bitter pill. They went from seeing Earth as a problem to be managed to accepting them as the central node in a new galactic network. It was a hell of a demotion. The Void Collective found a strange kind of redemption. Their massive harvesters, once instruments of planetary stripping, were retrofitted for disaster relief and environmental restoration. Turns out the same tech that can tear a moon apart is brilliant at stabilizing a collapsing atmosphere or reassembling a shattered ecosystem. They went from being the galaxy's bullies to its emergency response team. A better use of their skills, honestly. More stable work, too. Over at the Interstellar Diplomatic Institute, a Zixan scholar named Professor Cathar started teaching a popular course called Negotiating with Unpredictable Species. It was basically a case study on human interactions. Students learned to look for the quiet confidence behind the casual demeanor, to recognize that a lack of ceremony didn't mean a lack of seriousness. It became a required class for anyone hoping to work with the new galactic community. Meanwhile, the UEE's diplomatic solution, that first ship that faced down the harvester, was now spending its time on a very different mission. It was helping fledgling worlds set up planetary-scale governance models based on the Soul Accords principles. They weren't imposing a system. They were offering tools for collaboration, showing how different species could work together without anyone having to surrender their identity. The resolution to all this wasn't some grand final victory. It was a steady, ongoing process guided by what I can only call human aggressive optimism. This stubborn belief that problems are for solving, that cooperation beats coercion. and that no tradition is so sacred it can't be improved. It kept the galaxy moving, however reluctantly, toward a more functional and far more interesting future. And me, I finally got to enjoy my coffee, a perfectly tempered cup, sipped in an observation lounge overlooking Harmony Station. The quiet hum of a dozen different species working together is a lot more pleasant background noise than battle alerts and panic sirens. It's a safer galaxy, a more sensible one, and I have to admit it's a lot less boring. The fundamental error every galactic power made was basic. They saw Earth's apparent primitiveness and mistook it for weakness. It's a classic blunder. You look at a civilization's surface, their outdated satellites, their conventional power grids, their lack of visible advanced infrastructure, and you make an assumption. You slot them into a category, a rating, a number on a developmental scale. The galaxy's assessment systems were built to measure tangible assets, not intangible qualities. They could quantify fleet size and energy output, but they couldn't measure creativity. They had no metric for adaptability. Their databases were meticulous. Every known species was sorted by technological tier, military capacity, resource output. The categories were clear and had served them well for centuries. They knew how to handle a Tier 3 civilization. They knew the expected responses, the fears, the ambitions. What they didn't have was a column for philosophical approach, no field for willingness to ignore established norm, no checkbox for applies physics, creatively to solve existential threats. Humanity's entire strategy was built on factors their systems considered irrelevant, unquantifiable. The tension came from that disconnect. The play stupid games, win stupid prizes doctrine wasn't just a policy. It was a complete strategic framework, one the galaxy had never encountered. It rejected the entire concept of proportional response. It operated on a binary. You are either a respectful guest or an existential threat. There is no middle ground. This kind of thinking doesn't compute in a risk assessment model built on gradual escalation and managed conflict. It's too absolute, too final. Humanity's refusal to join the Grand Alliance was the clearest signal of this different mindset. The galactic powers saw it as avoidance, a fear of commitment, a lack of understanding. They interpreted the calm refusal as a sign of primitive short-sightedness. What it actually was preparation. Earth wasn't hiding. They were getting ready. They were using the time everyone else spent on diplomatic maneuvering to do something far more productive. Reverse engineer the technology of the species trying to recruit them. They were studying the playbook not to learn the plays, but to find the weaknesses. When the Void Collective chose to test that boundary with their harvester, they weren't just picking a fight with a reluctant species. They were choosing an enemy that had spent months preparing for exactly this scenario, an enemy that had already taken their own technology, improved it, and built a fleet designed for one purpose: to deliver a consequence so absolute it would be remembered forever. They learned the hard way that humanity's reputation for being unreasonably destructive isn't an exaggeration, it's an understatement. It's the natural outcome of a philosophy that treats existential threats not as problems to be managed, but as games to be ended. Permanently. Underestimation doesn't just lead to defeat. It leads to a redefinition of what defeat actually means. Today's galaxy operates on principles Earth never wanted to enforce, but did. Reluctant heroism, you might call it. The kind where you solve a problem so thoroughly that you accidentally redesign the entire system around the solution. The old model, coercion, hierarchical control, forced alliances, is fading. Not because everyone suddenly grew a conscience, but because Earth demonstrated that cooperation just works better. Mutual benefit isn't some lofty ideal now. It's a practical strategy. Voluntary participation replaced obligated service. Species engage because they see the advantage, not because they fear the alternative. Some of the traditional powers still chafe at this, of course. The Zephyrian Empire, in particular, struggles with the loss of their privileged position. They spent centuries at the top of the pyramid, and adjusting to a flat organizational structure doesn't come easily. Their diplomats still sometimes use the old language of dominance in meetings, and it always gets a few polite, confused looks. It's like watching someone show up to a business casual event in full ceremonial armor. The intent is clear, but the context has moved on. They're learning, though. Slowly, most species, however, have fully embraced the shift. They recognize that collaboration, however messy, produces more stability and innovation than domination ever could. The shared quantum processing networks alone have accelerated research in half a dozen fields. Defensive pacts based on mutual interest are stronger than those built on fear. A planet is more likely to fight for an ally it chose than a master it was assigned. It turns out that treating other civilizations as partners, not property, is just good long-term policy. Harmony Station is the physical proof of this. It wasn't built by decree or through conscripted labor. It was assembled by dozens of species working together, because they wanted to see it done. They shared designs, materials, and expertise. The station's architecture is a patchwork of different styles and technologies, and that's its greatest strength. Its foundations aren't built on forced obedience, but on shared purpose. It's uglier than a single design station, but it's also far more resilient. And it actually gets used. The resolution to this whole story is almost ironic. Earth's refusal to join that original war didn't create another alliance. It created something entirely different. A galaxy where cooperation is a choice, not a command. Where species engage on their own terms. The constant threat of coercion that defined interstellar politics for 1,000 years is just gone. It's been replaced by a persistent, often annoying, but undeniably effective optimism. And that choice, that fundamental shift, started with a single, simple lesson. One the Void Collective learned the hard way, and the rest of the galaxy learned by watching. You do not threaten humanity's home. It's not a rule written in any official charter. It doesn't need to be. It's understood. A foundational piece of the new reality. The one stupid game you just don't play. Because the prize is never worth it. So the galaxy learned humanity's real strength wasn't in their technology. It was in their refusal to accept the rules. Sometimes the most dangerous opponent isn't the one who plays your game better, but the one who tosses the board aside and builds a new one. Earth's Tuesday stands as a permanent reminder. Underestimate the quiet ones, the reluctant ones, and you might just receive a very direct, very final lesson on why some games simply aren't worth the cost of playing. Some prizes you really don't want to win. And this was just phase 1, the opening statement. A demonstration, not of raw power, but of philosophical difference. The galaxy thought it was dealing with a reluctant participant. They were actually dealing with a player who had rewritten the rules before the game even started. The Void's Harvester wasn't the first miscalculation. It was the first lesson, and humanity was just getting warmed up. While the rest of the galaxy saw humanity as a primitive backwater, Captain Rex Patterson got the real briefing. He sat in a secure facility while Admiral Martha Hendricks laid out Operation Honey Badger, a plan 6 months in the making. The room wasn't flashy. No holographic displays or dramatic lighting. Just charts, data streams, and the quiet hum of servers doing the real work. Every major power had been trying to recruit Earth for their war, each offering protection in exchange for loyalty. Favorable terms from their perspective. Vassal status from Earth's, not humanity's response was to accept membership, but not as a junior partner. Not as a resource to be managed. As an equal. The briefing made that clear. Hendricks didn't talk about joining a side. She talked about defining a new one. The tension in that room wasn't about fear. It was about intent. Earth planned to fight, but not by the galaxy's rules. Their strategy embraced methods that violated every norm of interstellar conflict. Creativity over convention, unconventional solutions to existential problems. Operation Honey Badger represented a complete pivot from passive resistance to proactive action. It wasn't about defending borders. It was about reshaping the board. The Department of Creative Solutions became Earth's real secret weapon. You wouldn't find it on any organizational chart leaked to Galactic Intelligence. It wasn't a military division. It was a think tank with clearance to break things. Philosophers working with engineers. Psychologists advising weapons designers. Artists drafting infiltration protocols. They operated on one principle. If it works, it's valid. No matter how absurd it looks on paper, the resolution was stark. Earth wasn't refusing to play the game. They were rewriting the rules in permanent marker. While galactic diplomats assumed humanity was stalling or negotiating, they were building, retrofitting, preparing. The first test of these new rules wasn't some distant future scenario. It was happening in real time right above their heads. That void harvester drifting toward Earth wasn't just a threat. It was a live-fire exercise, an opportunity to see if 6 months of secret work would hold up against actual galactic-grade hardware. Patterson left that briefing with a new perspective. He understood the calm he'd seen in Earth's representatives. It wasn't ignorance. It was the quiet confidence of someone who's already run the simulations and likes the odds. The galaxy saw a species that didn't know how to play the game. In reality, they were facing a player who had not only read the rulebook, but had already started scribbling amendments in the margins. And that harvester? It was about to become the first case study. Here's the thing about Admiral Diana Cross: she didn't give motivational speeches. She gave forecasts, and the one she delivered to Earth's leadership wasn't about rallying morale or justifying action. It was about physics. Cold, unavoidable, brutally simple physics. She stood there with the kind of calm you only see in people who have already run the numbers and know how the story ends. Her presentation didn't have flashy graphics or stirring music. It had data, charts on energy output, projections on structural integrity, calculations on maximum yield per kilogram of available matter. She called it Phase 1. The galaxy would later call it something else entirely. Cross laid it out without drama. Galactic warfare, she explained, operates like a very polite chess match. Moves and counter-moves, limited objectives, acceptable losses. It's all about proportionality. A measured response for a measured provocation. Humanity, she said, doesn't play chess. They play a different game altogether. One where the goal isn't to outmaneuver the opponent. It's to remove the board. Their approach to conflict skips the nuanced escalation and goes straight to absolute outcomes. Total victory or total destruction. No middle ground. No negotiated settlements. This isn't about being ruthless. It's about being efficient. Why waste time with a warning shot when you can solve the problem permanently? Why hold back when the stakes are existential? Cross argued that Earth would apply physics to every problem until it stopped being a problem. Norms and conventions be damned. If the enemy uses gravity manipulation, you don't develop a countermeasure. You develop a better way to manipulate gravity. If they use plasma-based weapons, you don't build shields. You build a bigger plasma weapon. It's not about matching force. It's about overwhelming it through pure, unapologetic application of principle. She'd been waiting years for this. Not for the fight itself, but for the opportunity to demonstrate the methodology. To show what happens when you take human ingenuity and point it at a problem with no constraints, no rules of engagement, just results. Her plan relied on a concept she called sufficient application of physics. It's a fancy way of saying throw enough science at something until it breaks or works. In this case, it meant reverse engineering alien technology not to copy it, but to improve it, to take their own hardware and turn it against them, but faster, stronger, meaner. The resolution was clear to everyone in that room. The Void Collective wasn't facing a primitive species that didn't understand the rules of war. They were facing a philosophical revolution. A complete rejection of the very idea that conflict should be predictable or manageable. Cross's presentation ended without applause. Just a quiet acknowledgement. They all understood what was coming. A demonstration, not of force but of principle. And the Void Harvester, still drifting toward Earth, was the perfect test subject. Arrogant enough to trigger the response. Advanced enough to make the point stick. Underestimation was about to meet consequence. And Cross had just written the equation. As the Void Harvester continued its slow drift through the solar system, its command nodes did what any advanced intelligence would do. They analyzed local transmissions. They intercepted everything. News broadcasts, entertainment streams, historical archives, even what humans call classic rock. And they categorized it all under the same heading: primitive cultural artifacts. Simple noise from a simple species, the kind of thing you file away for anthropological study, not tactical consideration. They saw music as decoration, art as distraction, stories as primitive attempts at meaning. Classic miscalculation. You have to understand. The Void Collective views biology through a very narrow lens. They assess species based on physical capabilities, technological benchmarks, resource potential. They don't have a category for cultural weaponization. Their profiling systems are designed to calculate threat levels based on fleet size and energy output, not on the psychological impact of a well-timed guitar riff. So when their sensors picked up human broadcasts, they filtered them as background data. Low-priority informational clutter, nothing to concern the tactical teams. Meanwhile, deep within Earth's strategic networks, a different kind of analysis was underway. A team that didn't report to military command but to something called the Department of Creative Solutions. They weren't just monitoring the Void's scans. They were monitoring the Void's reactions to those scans. They watched as the alien crew dismissed human media. They noted the lack of alarm, the condescension, the complete failure to recognize pattern, rhythm, and emotional resonance as tools, and they decided to give the Void a curated sample. It started subtly, a burst of energetic, aggressive music aimed at the Harvester's comms array. Then layered historical audio, war speeches, protest songs, opera, all mixed into a chaotic but purposeful stream. The Void's initial response was confusion. Their systems flagged the transmissions as irregular but non-threatening. Just more primitive noise. But the humans kept adjusting the feed. They targeted specific frequencies, specific emotional tones. They weren't just broadcasting. They were experimenting. The Harvester's crew began showing signs of agitation. Not fear, not yet. Irritation. Disorientation. The constant, unpredictable stream of human expression, some of it angry, some triumphant, some mournful, started to interfere with their focus. Their internal communications became more strained, more fragmented. They were trying to analyze the content logically, looking for coded messages or hidden data, completely missing the point. It wasn't about the information. It was about the effect. This wasn't entertainment. It was psychological conditioning, a deliberate attempt to disrupt cohesion and introduce doubt. The Void had reduced humanity to a biological and technological problem. They'd forgotten that culture is also an environment, a weapon, a language, and Earth was speaking it fluently, while the Harvester's analysts were still trying to decode the emotional subtext of a 20th century protest song. Human engineers were decoding the Harvester's own propulsion systems. The cultural offensive was just the opening act. A distraction, yes, but also a statement. The first real strike wasn't going to be a missile. It was a vibe. And the Void was completely unprepared. You know, in 17 years as a galactic military observer, I thought I'd seen every possible way a species could misjudge their enemies. Then I watched the Void Collective send a Harvester the size of Manhattan into Earth's solar system. They thought humans were primitive, just another entry in their database. What they didn't realize was that Earth had a very simple policy for uninvited guests. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. And the prize they won? Well, let's just say it redefined the meaning of diplomatic incident. Here's the thing about galactic diplomacy. It operates like a dinner party nobody wanted to host. But everyone feels entitled to attend. You've got 3 major powers circling Earth, each with their own cutlery and very different ideas about what's on the menu. The Zephyrian Empire saw humanity as a useful piece on their strategic board, something to deploy against their rivals. The crystalline hegemony viewed Earth as an administrative problem, a messy desk that needed tidying. And the Void Collective, they just saw resources, always resources. What unified them was this unshakable confidence that Earth would leap at the chance to join their so-called Grand Alliance. Their diplomatic playbook hadn't been updated in centuries. It assumed every species operates from a place of fear or ambition, so when Earth's response came through, not with panic or flattery, but with a calm and almost casual refusal, it broke something fundamental in the galactic order. You could hear the ancient protocols crack. Seasoned diplomats, beings who'd spent lifetimes manipulating systems and species, couldn't process it. A civilization turning down protection, choosing independence over security. It violated every principle of interstellar realpolitik. The more Earth said no, the more the galactic powers reassessed. Not as principled, not as strategic, as primitive. There's a certain arrogance in advanced cultures. They tend to mistake different values for backwardness. That misperception created a gap, wide and dangerous. Each superpower started drafting its own plan to force compliance. The Zephyrians mapped out political isolation strategies. The crystalline hegemony workshopped economic leverage. The Void Collective, less patient, began sketching something more direct. They all assumed Earth's refusal was a show of weakness, a lack of understanding. What they missed was the quiet confidence behind it. Earth wasn't refusing to play the game. They were setting the board. Their no wasn't fear. It was the opening move in a conflict nobody else realized had already started. And while the empires drafted their ultimatums and contingency plans, something Manhattan-sized was already moving toward the solar system, silent and assured. The first real test was on its way. You know what really threw the galaxy's seasoned diplomats off balance? It wasn't Earth's technology or even their military assets. It was their attitude. They just didn't seem to care. When the Zephyrians arrived with ceremonial crystals and full parade formation, expecting the kind of deference every other species had given them, Earth's response was so casual, it felt insulting. Humans didn't bow or flatter. They shook hands, sipped coffee, and asked pragmatic questions about trade routes and mutual defense clauses as if they were discussing zoning regulations. No awe, no fear. Just the polite detachment of people who'd seen this kind of performance before. I watched the whole exchange from a diplomatic feed, and I still remember the Zephyrian lead envoy's expression. Confusion, then frustration, then something close to alarm. You have to understand, galactic politics runs on ceremony. It's all grand pronouncements and formal gestures designed to show power and respect. Humans treated it like a neighborhood association meeting. They'd listen politely, take notes, then make some offhand comment that upended centuries of diplomatic precedent. One human representative, mid-sip of what I assume was terrible coffee, suggested rewriting an entire clause of the non-aggression pact. Just like that. No drama. Where other species saw history in the making, humans saw paperwork. It was all forms and fine print to them. That kind of nonchalance is terrifying if you're used to predictable reactions. You can't model it. You can't plan for it. The galaxy's risk assessment AIs kept spitting out errors. They were built to calculate fear, ambition, greed, not bureaucratic boredom. Earth's calm wasn't passive. It was the kind of quiet you only get from someone who knows something you don't. It wasn't that humans didn't understand the stakes. They just refused to play by the established rules of tension and escalation. Their unpredictability became their shield. While the superpowers assumed Earth was naive or stupid, humanity was sitting on a hand of cards no one else even knew were in the deck. They weren't ignorant. They were holding. And as that Manhattan-sized void harvester moved deeper into their system, it was becoming clear that someone was about to call their bluff. So the Void Collective decided to test Earth's boundaries with what they considered a gentle nudge. The kind of move diplomats in my line of work call a soft probe. Send something big and obvious into disputed space and watch how the locals react. They rolled out a Class 7 harvester, a ship roughly the size of Manhattan if you flattened it out and added engines. Ugly thing. All sharp angles and industrial bulk, built for stripping moons and small planets, not for subtlety. It drifted into the solar system without so much as a courtesy ping to orbital control. Standard void procedure. They assumed humans would respond in one of two ways. Either panic, which they'd seen from less advanced species, or submit quietly to demonstrated technological superiority. Their command deck was probably already drafting the follow-up demands. Resource rights, territorial concessions, the usual terms of surrender. They expected the whole song and dance, frantic diplomatic notes, emergency sessions at the United Nations, desperate pleas for negotiation. Standard galactic escalation. Predictable. What they got was a single polite message from Earth's transorbital authority. No panic, no outrage. Just a clear, almost casual request to vacate the system immediately. The kind of tone you'd use to ask a neighbor to move their car. The Void Captain logged it as non-hostile, low-urgency response and continued the harvest prep. They cataloged human comm satellites as primitive, marked lunar bases as low-priority targets, scanned Earth's defense grids and found them laughably outdated. All the surface stuff. All the obvious things. What they didn't see, what their sensors weren't even looking for, were the subtle rearrangements happening just outside their scan range. Silent construction in the asteroid belt. Retrofitted civilian freighters drifting into formation behind gas giants. Energy signatures that didn't match any known human tech, but didn't quite match Void tech either. Something in between. Something new. The Void crew noted Earth's continued calm as confirmation of backwardness. They saw patience where they should have seen preparation. Complacency where there was calculation. They kept running their scans, drafting their resource manifests, completely missing the fact that every second they lingered, Earth's response was solidifying. Not through committees, not through debates, through something far simpler. That harvester's presence had just triggered Earth's foundational policy on uninvited guests. You know the one. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Only this wasn't a metaphor, it wasn't a joke. It was an operational directive. And the Void Collective was still on board their ship, debating mineral yields and atmospheric processing rates, completely unaware that they were no longer the assessors. They were the assessed, and humanity was done asking politely. You know, play stupid games. Win stupid prizes sounds like one of those quirky human sayings you'd find on a novelty mug, not something to build interstellar policy around. But that's the thing about Earth. They don't decorate their fundamental doctrines with grand titles or poetic language. They just say what they mean and mean what they say. When it comes to uninvited guests, their approach is brutally simple. Respect the boundary or face the consequences. No ambiguity. No room for negotiation. The galactic powers heard the phrase and dismissed it as primitive humor, a little linguistic flourish from a species still fond of wordplay and casual sarcasm. They saw it as a cultural artifact, not an operational mandate. Big mistake. What they missed was the absolute seriousness behind those 5 words. For humans, it wasn't a joke. It was a principle. A line in the sand. Cross it and the response isn't calibrated. It's categorical. See, galactic warfare follows a very specific playbook. It's all about proportional response. A minor incursion gets a formal protest. A show of force earns a matching deployment. Escalation is gradual, almost ritualistic. It's like a carefully choreographed dance where everyone knows the steps. Humanity doesn't dance. Their defense strategy skips the subtlety. It goes from polite request to absolute force with nothing in between. Why waste time on warnings when the stakes are existential? This approach violates every norm of interstellar conflict. It's considered uncivilized, reckless, almost savage. The Void Collective learned that the hard way. Their harvester wasn't met with a negotiating team or a counter-threat. It was met with the full, unrestrained application of the stupid prizes doctrine. The destruction wasn't an attack in the traditional sense. It was a delivery. Earth was simply handing out the promised consequence for a very stupid game.